Parenting. It's hard. I mean, I'd assume so, given nobody wants to do it anymore. So for the rest of us, I guess we just gotta vicariously experience it through the magic that is pop culture. For as prominent as the topic is in movies and TV, I feel like a comfy middle ground portrayal of parenthood is harder to come by than you think. Like, you're either a sitcom family or you're an Oscar bait sad story.
I can't believe I have to know you forever!
And I guess When Life Gives You Tangerines leans more towards the sad drama side of things, but like, it's a comfy kind of sad drama. Like when you take a sick day and you're trying to piece together an All My Children plot while chugging Tylenol and ice cream. It's the kind of series that makes me appreciate my own parents in a way that's not just some hallmarky platitude. Media meant to humanize and understand older generations, and specifically parents, isn't exactly a new concept. That's literally Goofy Movie. But to see it so thoroughly picked apart not from the kid's perspective, but almost solely from the parents, does give a new sheen of paint to the concept. The format of 16 hour-long episodes really lets you just sit in the past of the main couple and understand how they've grown over their decade-spanning story, and how, yeah, sometimes merely existing for long enough is enough to warrant a story all your own. When Life Gives You Tangerines tells the story of Hae-joon and Gwan, two local kids growing up on Jeju Island in the 1960s. And while their budding love story is the main draw of the show, the true focal point is the connections they form over their lifetime, and seeing how those relations are continually shuffled, rehashed, or completely revised throughout a person's life. The show is non-linear storytelling, allowing for this frenetic bouncing back and forth between decades to serve as context for character motivations. I think most would technically define Tangerine Show as a drama first and foremost, but its non-linear storytelling allows it to stretch its legs and be more freeform. Not just with a plot, but the overall genre. Sometimes it's a drama, sometimes it's a romance, sometimes it's action, comedy, school life, slice of life, tragedy. Life has no set emotion, so a show reflecting one's life shouldn't be pinned down to a single genre either. Imagine if Back to the Future was told by way of Lost, but instead of literal time travel, the characters go through each decade naturally.
I gotta go.
All while popping in on old friends, enemies, frenemies, and even the people thought to be inconsequential background characters. Even visually, the series spares no expense, forming this ornate tapestry of Korean history from the late 60s until now. The April Revolution, the May 16 coup, the 88 Olympics, the IMF crisis, Seo Taiji and boys disbanding. It's all very specifically Korean, and that specificity makes the world that much more real, even to a filthy American that had no idea of these events. I'd assume this is how a foreigner feels while watching Forrest Gump. Like, I got the gist of the big historical events being alluded to, but really, I just had to let the pretty time period backdrop wash over me. Between the set design, makeup, and costumes, Tangerine Show really does hit up the visual highs from each decade without coming off like Stranger Things levels of parody. My favorite is the early 70s, since everyone looks like old pictures from my parents' family albums.
너 담배 피지? 담배 피고 똥 꽂지 말고.
The early 90s episodes do this too, where there's that certain level of garishness that you just can't make up. You got the kiddies looking like period-accurate Shonen Jump leads.
지금 거의 등이 무천도사예요.
드래곤볼을 보세요.
The series also doesn't shy away from the characters being poor, meaning that their fashion, especially early on, isn't necessarily fresh, so you have moments like Hae-joon and Gwan-shik eloping while wearing these shoulder-paddingest, big white pearlingest outfits. It's great. The dirt roads, rice fields, and yellow flower garden of the 60s serve as this idealized version of Hae-joon and Gwan-shik's childhood, the starting point of their love story, also serving as a natural hub of sorts. No matter how far out into their timeline we get, the story always takes the time to backtrack to this specific time and place as the character's foundation, for better or worse. Seeing the sheer amount of love and craft put into the Jeju Island sets in particular is insane. Apparently Park Bo-gum, the character playing Gwan-shik, had to do his swimming scenes both on location and on set, and the two blend seamlessly. All the boat scenes just feel really fun from a technical standpoint, since it's one of those things where even with CG complementing things like the weather and lighting, the sets still feel the need to fill a giant box with water to accurately get their boat to sway. Like, that's really cool! With the amount of flashbacks and flash forwards between decades, it would be easy to pin the series as a period piece, but again, life doesn't exist as a single genre, and a setting can only do so much without a story. Starting with the young Hae-joon, we're immediately thrust into a world of isolation. Her father died at a young age, and her mother, Jeon Kwon-ye, isn't that far behind. See, Kwon-ye lives as a hanyo, a high-risk, low-reward job as a diver harvesting seafood and the like to sell at the local market. Even among her hanyo gal pals, Kwon-ye refuses to take any handouts from them.
할 일 말만 아들이 시신데 그 목근형 풀치를 왜 여기가 다 해내냐고. 내가 내 새끼 먹이자고 내 집 바로 살지. 남의 할망 먹이자고 전복 따대.
her pride as a mother not allowing anyone outside her family to support Hae-joon. But when her familial options are being so limited, Hae-joon is really pushed into a corner when her mother does eventually die. While she technically has housing and food thanks to her paternal uncle, Hae-joon lives like a second-class citizen under that roof, her uncle prioritizing his own kids over herself. And if it weren't for fellow local kid Gwan-shik's own intervention, Hae-joon would have continued living that second-class lifestyle.
섬놈한테는 절대 never.
그러려면 손 빼.
Gwan-shik toes that line of reply guy and genuinely well-meaning young man, which are like a dime a dozen in today's society, but when uprooted and planted into 60s Korea, he kinda makes for this refreshing novelty, like giving a starving Elizabethan boy Baja Blast. I know how functionally he's the handsome prince that saves Hae-joon from her life of K-drama tragedy, but you never really get that feeling. Because we meet the characters in the 60s, Gwan-shik being a kind and all-around decent human being to Hae-joon is framed as this rarity. He's equal parts progressive in that he allows Hae-joon the independence to pursue her dreams of being a scholar and poet, while still adhering to heteronormative ideas of masculinity. Being the tall, silent type that supports his partner at all costs is like comedically tropey, especially coming from a K-drama, but Tangerine Show is able to get away with it somehow. With something like a biopic, the task at hand is to water down a person's life to its essentials, and hope each ingredient is relevant enough to each other to somehow form a 3-act structure. But in Tangerine Show's case, the characters are fictional. No one's his Hawkeye, sorry.
야가 호남, 야가 여시상.
The show could, for its own sanity, make a cast of characters that conveniently flow together and form a 3-act structure over the course of a lifetime, but it knows audiences won't buy that, so it's tasked with not only making a fictional person's entire life, but expressing it in such a way that's both realistic and compelling. While the characters suffer the misfortune of being born in a very unmodern time period, they still need to be likable by modern standards, and I think that's an interesting writing challenge. I'll just kind of assume that people of a certain generation will have certain biases, but like, realistically, that won't be the case for everyone. Surely there was someone in the Middle Ages that believed in proper hygiene. Likewise, Tangerine Show picks that curiosity scab of a forward-thinking couple stuck in the very backwards time period known as 1960s Korea. A time period not only characterized by blatant sexism and heteronormative gender roles, but a severe loyalty to family hierarchies. If you say remarry or elope, it might as well be the town alcoholic. Gwan-shik's out here being the biggest wife guy in Jeju, and he doesn't know his actions are signaling his own death warrant. It's that meta challenge of trying to write modern characters that don't come off as too perfect, but also aren't immediately cancelable, that I think adds to Tangerine Show's charm. The characters act of their own will, their sensibilities are their own, but because of their bullheadedness, you get to see how a more modern sensibility thinker would be boxed into the shortcomings of that older time period. You see this immediately as both Gwan-shik and Hae-joon are punished for wanting more from their life and livelihoods. Inversely, we see how this gets reflected in the future when society begins to catch up to their way of thinking. As the world begins to embrace women in the workforce and men with emotions, you begin to wonder if our main couple missed the boat when it came to opportunities. Were they geniuses born before their time, meant to merely pass the baton of progress to the next generation? Or would they be able to reap the benefits of a better society themselves? In a lot of ways, it's essentially the K-drama version of This Is Us, down to casting a hot pop idol as the mom. On paper, it's still not the most compelling idea, yet the series has stuck in my head ever since I finished it, and I can't quite put my finger on why. It's IU, this queen, K-pop singing sensation that's sweeping the nation. They definitely timed the release of this drama to coincide with both her birthday and her new album. It's consumerism all the way down, but what can I say? I like it. Though it is weird I chose this of all her dramas to watch. While I've been a fan of her music, I never really felt inclined to check out the K-dramas she starred in before. Persona was an exception, since I'm a sucker for anthology shows. And I think a big part of that is, at least to my understanding, her roles in K-dramas can be summed up as inexplicable badass, sassy love interest, or some combination of the two. Like I said, I've never seen her other K-dramas before, so maybe that's a reach. Tell me I'm a dingus in the comments and recommend an IU drama to watch, I guess. What I can say with certainty is that IU's performance in Tangerine Show is unique in that she plays not just the role of the mom and main character, Hae-joon, but her daughter Kumyoung in the flash-forwards as well. And she doesn't just play Hae-joon at one point in the character's life either. She plays a mom from ages 17 to well into her 30s, and to my knowledge, they use no digital de-aging either. This is all good old-fashioned movie magic that can only be attributed to a good makeup team and lighting. And while IU herself doesn't mention makeup used for de-aging, she does reference how detailed and era-specific the makeup team gets as they continue to bounce back and forth between decades.
분장 같은 것도 그 당시에 유행을
가장 많이 반영해서 심하게 분장팀 분들과 또 메이크업 선생님이랑 상의를 해서 했는데
It makes for this fun game of catch-up where we get to see the small and not-so-small ways Hae-joon changes over time, and the dedication the staff is willing to go behind the scenes to make her as young as necessary. It's like in Benjamin Button where they de-age Brad Pitt to his Fight Club era, and you think that's the youngest they'll de-age him, then they reveal him in his Cool World era, and you're like, IU playing Hae-joon in modern-day Kom-young is one of those things where you forget about it every time because not only does she slip into the separate roles so seamlessly, but the characters are written like two separate people. What a concept. Hae-joon is what I'd expect a character portrayed by IU to be. Bullheaded, kinda brash, a bit of a badass when necessary. 10 out of 10 on the Queen meter. Doubly so because they make sure to maintain that character even when she's portrayed by an older actor in the flash forwards. Moon So-ri as the older Hae-joon knocks it out of the park. She's somehow able to wrangle in all that fire that the younger Hae-joon had and adapt it into this world of adulthood.
아우 어디서 이 아우
했지!
아 그냥 좀 깔아먹까
Even at an age when her peers have come to accept compromises, she's still willing to question the status quo and bring change when everyone else is too complacent to do so. Meanwhile, smash cut to this absolute ingrate child. Hae-joon lived in absolute poverty. Don't be mad when she grills you about having too many shoes.
애순이랑 금명이를 바라봤을 때 어느 인물에 조금 더 마음이 가고
그건 당연히 예순이지. 그러니까 이렇게 말을 좀 못되게 하거나 하면 어디 한켠이 내가 너무 나 스스로한테 하는 말인 것 같아서 내가 예순이도 연기를 했다 보니까
We're so used to media portraying the mother through the lens of her kids first and foremost, but in this case everyone is very distinctly their own person. Hae-joon is the main character of her story, and Kom-young is the main character of hers. So much so that the first time we fully switch over to the daughter's story for an episode, it feels kinda weird. Like that small child in early episodes now has to learn to hold her own when her parents aren't around, and the plot reflects this perfectly. Meanwhile, Hae-joon must learn to pivot from her role as a mother back to a role in her community. They're each separate growing pains, and both are done so distinctly that you forget that on a meta level, this was all to establish Moon So-ri as the new Hae-joon while shifting IU into the role of Kom-young, and both pull off that transition perfectly.
화장실 청소는 왜 해? 엄마 이러니까 내가 아주 부르기가 싫다고.
야, 미운 37. 고마우면 그냥 고맙다 해.
Kom-young is a Gen Xer, and IU clearly understood the assignment. She mentions how she makes her voice slightly deeper as Kom-young, and it pairs perfectly with the character's more slovenly, spoiled attitude. Studying in the big city of Seoul, and eventually studying abroad in Japan, she's everything Hae-joon wanted to be, while still openly devolving into a whiny baby in the presence of her parents. It's that very specific Gen X type of personality, where she's strong and independent when forced into that role, but will begrudgingly take her parents' help when they inevitably visit. Even her love story is distinctly its own thing. Later into the series, Kom-young gets into a love triangle of sorts, with two dudes living very era-specific lives. The first is a crybaby forced to serve his mandatory stint in the army, while the second is an artist that paints these giant murals meant to advertise movies for the local theater. Tangerine Show isn't exactly subtle with the pairings it prefers, but this is probably best portrayed in its sheer contempt for Park Young-boom, the army guy. From the get-go, it frames him to be similar to Gwan, and yet the characters themselves can't stand his level of wife guy behavior.
군대를 갔다 와도 이러냐.
죽으면 나 죽어
We can't all pull off that level of cringy devotion, dude, sorry. And it's in Kom-young's decision to break up with him and eventually find love with Park Jun-sub the artist that we see Tangerine Show's true strength. What worked in one time period won't work in another. Story-wise, it would just be the cast repeating a plot beat, but in the greater world of the series, it expresses how change and adaptability will win out over stagnancy. Time and time again, this family is faced with major change and has to learn to adapt or suffer the consequences. And the show doesn't shy away from those consequences either.
얘, 나는 네 아버지 손 보고 무슨 노가다꾼인 줄 알았어.
어디?
Once the show establishes its gimmick of bouncing back and forth between the past and present, it starts to go hard on the member berries. References to plot beats mentioned earlier, specifically as a means of comeuppance for the villains. Yeah, there's villains in the show. And the member berries essentially serve as the Kamehameha of the Tangerine verse. Time makes fools of everyone, especially if you suck ass. At the beginning, the villains take the form of the setting in relation to Hae-joon. Her fears of forever being a townie in Jeju manifested through her open desire to marry someone in Seoul.
지어도 모르는 놈은 절대 never.
or her own school expelling her for attempting to elope with Gwan-shik, while Gwan-shik suffers no consequences.
왜 애순이만
그걸 몰라서 물어? 둘이 똑같이 붙어 놀아도 사내 치기는 허골짓이고 지집의 순정은 환양질이라는 걸 어쩌? 그걸 몰라서 남의 판을 엎었느냐고.
It's like being a woman in the 60s was inherently oppressive or something. And yet for as openly hostile as the island and school are to her, we see a comeuppance of sorts in the flash forwards, Kum-young getting accepted to the most prestigious school in Seoul, and Ae-soon winning her old high school's poetry contest.
우리 학교에서 장원이 나왔는데 애를 못 찾아.
Or where previously these insurmountable obstacles become hurdles the characters barely even notice they've walked over later down the line. Some real New Game Plus moments as we progress through the series. And the same can be said for the literal villains of the show as well. Boo-sang-ki essentially serves as the Biff to Ae-soon and Gwan-shik's George and Lorraine, where for how slimy as he was to them early in life, they inexplicably just keep him around. I'd say it's almost cruel if we didn't know just how slimy and vindictive he was to them as literal teenagers. Dude hires Gwan-shik to work on his boat and intentionally postpones returning to the mainland when he hurts his finger, an injury that remains with him throughout the rest of the series. Meanwhile, he ends up being Ae-soon's almost fiancé after her and Gwan-shik's planned eloping goes wrong. The man has beef with both the main characters for very separate reasons, so in terms of the story, it makes sense to just keep him around. But like all good villains, he begins to have a redemption arc by the end, and I'm still on the fence as to whether or not it's deserved or not. Dude cheats on and abuses his wife, so I'm inclined to lean more towards not. He is Sasuke levels of terrorist threat to our characters. Sometimes you just gotta cut your losses and call it a day. But also, he serves as the embodiment of all misfortune in life. Those full frontal asshole moments that just blindside you and make you wish you didn't wake up that morning. What are our heroes without a good villain? Likewise, what is life without some absolute stinker days? And in typical Tangerine Show fashion, he absolutely gets his comeuppance for every stinker day he adds to the calendar. He loses his boat, his wife, his kids' respect, the island's respect, twice, all while being intrinsically intertwined into the main cast's life for literal decades. He competes against Gwan-shik as a fellow fisherman, he runs against Ae-soon for mayor. Chances are, if our main couple are met with an opposing force in some way, it ends up being Boo-sang-ki every time. And yet once he becomes a grandfather, he begins to reluctantly shift into the role of a supporter character, fully admitting that he can't be an asshole forever the second he realizes there's a child in his life reliant on him, because God knows the actual dad isn't going to do anything. Okay, so as a K-drama, Tangerine Show naturally gravitates towards uplifting their women characters. They're strong-willed, able-bodied, and just all-around badasses that understand that the world around them will never be fully willing to accommodate them, so they're forced to scrape and struggle just to eke out an existence all their own. It's a message the show rightfully wears on its sleeve, and among the handful of articles and deep dives I've been able to find in English, this is the takeaway that most people come home with. But we gotta talk about the stinky boys in the room too. Like, I didn't even mention the parents had a son until now because he's so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And I guess that's to the series' credit. See, Ae-soon and Gwan-shik had 2 more kids after Kum-young, Un-myung and Poo-myung. Laying them all out like that, their names actually translate to gold, silver, and bronze. Though, knowing that, it feels a bit too on the nose when you find out what happens next. See, while Kum-young was the golden child, excelling in school well enough to travel abroad, Un-myung and Poo-myung were like the forgotten scraps. With Poo-myung passing at an early age during a storm, the death looms over the family for years to come. And while the parents may have thought they settled any guilt with the children shortly after the incident, it's clear both the surviving children take this trauma to heart going forward, Kum-myung doing her best to excel as a means to make amends, while Un-myung just kinda stays stagnant. Yeah, childhood trauma can lead to misconduct of increasing severity if left unchecked, go figure. While Kum-young was making moves and studying in Seoul, Un-myung was living that troubled teen life, stealing letters off his teacher's cars and gifting them to his girlfriend. And even after his stint at the army, the second he comes home, he tells his parents that said girlfriend is pregnant. Also, his girlfriend is the daughter of series bad guy Boo-sang-ki.
하는 거야.
And his arc just kinda continues to snowball from there, as he gets into some bad business practices, ends up in jail, getting bailed out only after his parents sell the boat that was their livelihood for a time. It's just not looking good for my guy. And the parents take this personally. Upon realizing the sheer inequality in attention they've given their kids, it ultimately lies in the hands of Hae-joon and Gwan-shik to make things right. And they try. They pull strings to get Eun-myung a decent job, they let him live at home, they help raise his kid, they reach out to Busan-ki for some monetary favors. It's not ideal, and there's a lot of unspoken ego getting checked out the door for all involved, but he does make it out alright. Don't know if you can say that for Park Young-boom.
찍겠습니다. 하나, 둘, 셋.
내가 싫다고 했지. 그 새끼 그냥 마음에 안 든다고 했지. 했지?
Yeah, I know I talked about the crybaby army love interest already, but I was just scratching the surface with that guy. There's a reason why he and his family take up a whole arc of the series, complete with an epilogue. See, while Youngbum and Kumyong get along decently well as a couple, the real reason behind their relationship crashing and burning was this guy's mother, Boo-young. They printed out wedding invites and the mom was still like, no.
Why?
Because Kumyong's family is poor. Seeing Boo-young butt heads with Kumyong gets increasingly more painful to watch every time. Like the Z-fighters thinking they got the upper hand on Frieza, but then he whips out another transformation. Yeah, we get one more villain to talk about, so strap in.
어서 와, 아들.
봄을 사는 새싹들에겐 전쟁.
안녕하세요.
너 집에도 드나드니?
머리 위 콘크리트를 들어올리는 시련이었다.
It would be one thing if it was just limited to Kumyong, but of course it's a K-drama, so the pain's gotta be extended to her family as well. For a while, whenever Kumyong has to go up against Boo-young and the stupid son tries to play the neutral peacemaker, you think, okay, surely this will be the last time and Kumyong finally drops his sorry ass. But she puts up with his mother's abuse time and time again, because she's not marrying her. It's not like she's ever gonna see her again. Oh, you poor stupid child, you. So they have the formal dinner where the engaged couple's parents meet each other, and the difference is night and day. Kumyong sucks at pouring the porridge, Gwan-shik can't even make eye contact while shaking hands because his finger's still busted from like 20 years ago, and your girl Aesun is just biting her tongue the entire time because she knows if she doesn't shut up, she's gonna end up telling that entire family to f**k off. The most she's able to do is back up Kumyong and pour the porridge the right way, but even then, the damage has been done. Kumyong will never be seen as worthy of her in-laws, and it's just gonna stay that way. All because this stupid asshole can't stand up for his girl. That is being a good boyfriend 101, my guy. Come back when you get enough gym badges to tame your mom. Tangerine Show does a good job portraying the sheer amount of abuse characters are willing to tolerate when it's towards themselves. But the second that abuse is directed at their loved ones, it's the final straw. You can just chalk this up to being a family thing, but in the grander scheme of the show, you see this done for people that aren't related to each other either. Time and time again, When Life Gives You Tangerines demonstrates how, while self-sacrifice is bearable, there is zero tolerance when it comes to witnessing people cause harm onto others. And the Boo-young arc is probably the best example of this. The entire time, Kumyong is willing to look past the shortcomings of her future in-laws since all the vitriol has been aimed towards her. But the second Boo-young talks smack about Aesun and Gwan-shik, it's like, oh, you did not.
어머님 한 번도 점잖으셨던 적 없으세요. 저는 아빠선 안 부끄러워요. 저희 부모님은 하나도 안 부끄러워요. 이 결혼 준비하는 내내 어머님 댁보다 저희 집이 훨씬 더 품이 있었어요.
Not only does she stand up for her parents, but she takes back her own self-respect and agency in this situation too. She breaks up with Young Boom, the marriage is officially called off, and this evil mother lives another day convinced that her blatant bullying was the right thing to do. Boo-young may be out of the picture, but in her eyes, she remains undefeated. But then the story continues. You flash forward 4 years later to an older Boo-young, sitting in a living room in the dark. Her son arrives home late, drunk but otherwise fine. The picture of success as far as his mother is concerned. He married the woman she wanted of him, and got the job she wanted of him, and only after these 4 years of resentment does he finally speak up. He should have married Kumyong when he had the chance.
제 인생이에요, 제 인생. 나 바라는 건 한 번도 못 가져보는 병신 같은 제 인생이라고요. 아유, 제 결혼식에서 오직 어머니만 웃고 계시잖아요.
And it is with this simple, drunken outburst that Boo-young is truly defeated. So, yeah, that's Stinky Boy number 2 down. Even Gwan-shik, for as impossibly perfect of a husband he is, begins to show cracks in his armor when it comes to his daughter. Sure, the strong silent type works as a husband, but as a parent, Gwan-shik's lack of communication comes off as impossibly distant and uncaring. So much of his character arc in the latter half of the series involves learning to communicate better with his daughter, though ultimately the role falls in the hands of Kumyong to bridge that communication gap. Even from a young age, Gwan-shik prides himself in being a provider. He helps Ae-soon sell cabbages, he makes sure Kumyong always has peas to snack on, he goes out of his way to take the squid out of his own soup so his daughter can have more. It's a very food-centric means of expression. And yet, for as much as he's able to do, his ultimate shortcoming is that he cannot express himself with words alone. This comes to a head in the series' final episodes when he's bedridden and on the verge of death. With his body failing, he only now is forced to communicate with words, and it is the most heart-wrenching moment of the series. I'm a sucker for stories about stories, and Tangerine Show sneaks in a bit of that near the end. As the series starts, you assume that Ae-soon acts as the series' occasional narrator.
봄이 봄인 걸 알았더라면 까짓 거 더 진하게 좀 살아볼 걸.
But after a few more times, it becomes clear that it's actually Kumyong.
엄마는 그때 딸에게 말할 수 없었다고 했다.
Her slightly deeper voice and colder tone suggest a certain distance from the events she's recounting, learning to understand their importance as she's speaking them. And as it turns out, all these stories come from Gwan-shik. At a loss for anything else to say at his hospital bed, he begins recounting the various adventures he had with Ae-soon. The tiny victories, the moments of pride, the moments of pleasures, sadness, the nothing in particular, just anything on his mind. And as he verbally places each of these moments out for his daughter to see, it's only then that he realizes that, yeah, of course it was worth it. Even with all his shortcomings behind him, it wasn't just wasted time. I grew up in a time when having childhood pictures weren't just commonplace, but expected. It was practically a guaranteed sitcom joke for parents to have too many pictures of their child. And yet, when I compare that to my parents' own childhood pictures of themselves, it feels almost unfair. Pictures from my parents growing up were never a sure thing, and so their stories, their history, their culture became reliant on personal recollections. And so when you see bits and pieces of those stories reflected in the media you watch, they become all the more precious. My parents grew up in the rural Philippines during the 60s, but while the details were different, seeing a rural Korea from the same decade was like an affirmation that the stories my parents told actually happened. Seeing the long winding dirt roads and rice fields and gaudy fashion reminded me of pictures from my own parents' family albums. Those pictures suddenly feeling that much more real and precious when seen in motion. We tend to develop this sense for viewing the past through this lens of hyper-importance, that the fact that it's history must mean that everything about it is to be taken seriously, when the reality is the past had just as much joy, silliness, and mundanity as the present. When Life Gives You Tangerines made me appreciate my parents not just because it humanized the past, but because it gave worth to their strife. That their experiences weren't just wasted time, but stories worth recollecting and passing down. That in keeping these stories to ourselves, we forfeit their worth, but in sharing them with the next generation, we affirm that they were worth living through to begin with.